The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Estou passando nesse podcast para dividir uma informação que fez toda a diferença na minha vida. Quer fazer pós-graduação, mas tá impossível correr de um lugar para o outro?
Pois é, ainda mais com o trânsito.
Então você precisa conhecer a educação à distância do Senac. Sabia que é nota máxima no MEC? E tem diversos cursos de pós-graduação para te levar ainda mais longe. 100% online, sem necessidade de TCC e com acesso direto a todos os professores.
Ah, saber isso fez diferença sim.
Inscreva-se já na pós-graduação EAD. Quer saber? Senac EAD.
No mai haere mai, piki mai, kaki mai. This is Gone By Lunchtime, and we are back. Big apologies to the several people, 5 in fact, who got in touch to complain about the lack of a Gone By Lunchtime. I'd like to particularly apologise to my mother and the other person who on Twitter was unhappy because they were missing their weekly sedative. I think that was the insomnia cure. Is that the
my insomnia
vibe?
misses your podcast. That's not a bad thing these days. Nowadays you can pass that off as ASMR. Being bored to sleep by our podcast is self-care.
GBL, ASMR. Annabelle Lee Mather, how are you?
Kia ora, pai. I'm very well. E mihi ana ki te kaupapa o Mahuru Māori. Just enjoying Māori language month, September.
Kia ora. Isn't it next week as well? It's like a week and a month.
There's the week, which is the official Māori language week, and then there's Mahuru Māori, which is a grassroots initiative that's where Māori just try to, where New Zealanders try to speak more Māori throughout the month.
How do we
September.
say, can you help me with, how do I say shout out to the bad boys of Brexit in
E mihi
Te Reo?
ana ki ngā bad boys
E mihi
or
ana ki
Brexit.
ngā bad boys or Brexit.
tika.
Ben Thomas, nice to see you.
Nice to see you guys. I'm sorry too.
The reason we couldn't do the podcast last week was because we were too busy modelling for a new tea towel, which is available now on the members merch site of the spin-off, and it's got a crew of people, including Annabelle Lee Mather, who has some issues about her shoes, but otherwise it's looking glorious.
I've had several people contact me about my footwear. How amazing would it be, though, as a face mask? That could be our next thing.
It's a Toby Morris, the inimitable Toby Morris has done this tea towel. And it's also got Ben Thomas on it with a collection of jars of... Is that cider, Ben? What is that?
I assume it's Mountain Dew.
Mountain Dew.
I think it's a callback.
It's Ben's special stash, which he will take with him next he goes into the Urewera bush, so he can drink his own.
Baby Yak is
Yes.
there too.
On the agenda
Beloved
today...
baby.
Well, no, look, I don't think we've finished.
Oh.
We haven't apologised to our co-leaders in New Zealand podcasting. Duncan Grieve was left to do a monopod, another monopod on the fold
Yes.
because of our absence, our selfish absence. We need to apologise to the members, the
Yes.
spin-off
Yeah.
members.
Yep.
Even though
Kia ora, members.
even though modelling for the tea towel fulfilled all of the official criteria of producing merch and making us podcast millionaires,
Yeah.
it ran up against the strong kaupapa of this podcast, which is talking shit on the internet, and we let people down. I want to apologise to the publicly funded podcasts,
Kia ora.
Caucus, which have been groaning under a talent and hosting deficit for years, while we're off swanning around
I
the
get it.
nation.
I see what you're doing now.
I want to apologise to the podcasting unions.
This
we
is a
broke
James
rank.
Shaw
Yeah.
bit. This is a James
Yeah,
Shaw bit.
yeah, no.
And
Are you considering resigning over it, though?
I think that if we had to make this decision again, we would do the same thing, but we would apologise twice as much to reflect just what an egregious error it was.
But you also want to apologise to Flick for their sponsorship of this podcast.
I'm really sorry, Flick. We're going to give you back 5.
Several
I can't
watts,
do maths.
many watts.
$12 million of wattage.
We're doing this podcast in the dark to try and repay some of the Flick sponsorship.
That would be the Ben is, of course, referring to James Shaw's lengthy apology for the funding of the private green school under the Shovel-Ready Infrastructure Fund, which we'll get to in a bit. We've got much more to say about that. But yes, I like the idea of him slowly extinguishing all the lamps around the legislative chamber and then removing all his clothes and eventually curling up into a fetal position and shrinking into a prune, just going, I apologise. On the agenda today, the campaign returns, campaign 2.0, election 2020. We've got some close analysis of Winston Peters' cigarette smoking surreptitiously at Otago University, the aforementioned many apologies of James Shaw over the Green School, and even a bit of policy, possibly, to discuss. Oh, bonus, listeners. Hang on at the end. I am going to speak briefly with Alice Snedden, who has made a pretty fabulous series called Bad News. You've seen that, haven't you?
Oh my God, I'm obsessed with her.
Are you?
Yeah.
Oh, well, you'll want to stick around too.
I love her so
Do you?
much.
I should have got you to interview her. I mean, I love her too, but
I bet I love
you're
her
full
more
stab.
than you. Yeah.
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 Have you seen the series, Ben?
She's my favourite treaty partner.
Okay. Let's talk about this so-called election. The election campaign caught a bit of Rona, and it got sent to bed by its mum, Jacinda Ardern, for a few weeks, and now it's kind of scraping its way back to life, bleary-eyed, limping. Are we excited? Annabelle Lee Mather, out of 1,000, how excited are you about the election recharge?
It would be hard to be less excited than what I am, to be fair.
People are going to turn off the podcast. Can you just lie? It's like in the...
Oh, sorry.
It's like football commentators
like,
commentating on really boring games going, well, something exciting looks like it's about to happen.
Yeah.
Say that?
Yes. Like edge of my seat. Cannot wait
it can only
to see what
exciting.
happens. Like so many twists and turns.
You're a 0 out of 1,000, Ben.
What was that thing that we used to say in the Key government? We're poised. We're on the cusp of something special. And nobody even knew what the special thing was. It was just sort of danced around. But it was whatever it was coming and it was special.
Well, it was a brighter future too. So we've got that to look forward to.
Yeah, I wonder if he meant 2020. The election campaign now, it's been delayed by... How many days was it delayed by?
It was delayed by 4 weeks.
4 weeks. So essentially 27 days later, which I think reflects the kind of zombified state that our politicians are currently in. Clambering around the country like the living dead. Everyone looks just exhausted.
A lot of reanimated corpses out there.
Weekend at Bernie's, yeah.
Weekend at Bernie's. Jacinda Ardern has been basing herself in Morrinsville, which is such an unlikely thing, right? You know, it's election time. The hub of campaigning, Morrinsville. Winston Peters is down south. We'll get to that a bit later. Judith Collins has been in Hawke's Bay starting the week, as we are like sort of 6 weeks to go. She announced kind of interesting policy yesterday. I don't know if you guys caught up with it, about methamphetamine use, which was, you know, Dr. Shane was there being the good doctor a bit, and it was kind of health focused. You know, I mean, there's still a bit of law and order stuff involved, but it was kind of, you know, less punitive, less sort of draconian sounding than some policies of old.
Yeah, Judith Collins tends to be misunderstood because of that whole crusher persona that first
that she nurtured.
really helped her. Yeah, absolutely. It was very deliberate.
Her brand is ruthlessness.
Yeah, absolutely. But she's a bit more nuanced than that. She's actually probably one of the best policy heads in the National Party. Shane Matariki has always been very health-focused. You saw that with his cannabis or medicinal.
Well, the clues in
cannabis
the doctor, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's really good how they've managed to, it's very effective the way that National now have him referred to as Dr. Shane Matariki at all times, even by media, which you didn't used to see, for instance, with Dr. Jonathan Coleman, who was also a real doctor as opposed to a doctor of theology or whatever David Clark was.
Yeah.
And so that's good. That's pretty effective branding for old sensible head Shane Matariki.
Jacinda Ardern ventured out from Campaign Central Morrinsville, Annabelle, to Rotorua yesterday to announce a kind of bit of a crowd pleaser policy first up in Campaign 2.0, which is a new public holiday in the form of a Matariki holiday, although, hang on a minute, not to be introduced until 2022. Is that a vote winner?
Yes, I think it will be a vote winner. The irony is the people who seem to be most upset about it are the same people who complain about why Māori can't stand around singing Kumbaya on Waitangi Day. Why can't we have a day of happiness and celebration? Well, here it is, guys. It's here all for you. Obviously, there's been comparisons to John Key and the flag policy, the flag referendum. The good thing about this is that we'll actually get something at the end of it. What I find curious, though, is to say that it's an idea whose time has come, but not for another 2 years. If its time has come, why aren't we bringing it in sooner? And, some of the arguments in support of it around supporting the tourism sector, which I think is a great kaupapa, they're going to have to wait 2 years until they see the benefits of it. So it does have that kind of bitter aftertaste of pie-in-the-sky policy that we know that Labour often roll out where, promises are made, but you don't get the benefit of them until a long, long time after.
A working group to decide how the date should be agreed, because that's going to be quite an interesting thing in itself as a subplot. Ben, Annabelle mentioned there was a lot of criticism, and pretty much all the other parties, if I have it right, certainly National, New Zealand First and the ACT Party dismissed it as bad timing, given the state of business and the recession. You don't introduce new public holidays and so on. La La Land, said David Seymour. Interestingly, as Audrey Young observed in the New Zealand Herald, that's probably music to Jacinda Ardern's ears, because you kick off the campaign with a positive thing that, to be honest, most people are going to feel all right about, and for businesses like way in the future, who cares? So is that kind of a win too, that criticism? Do you think anyone really goes, this is outrageous and going to hurt the economy?
Small business owners, self-employed people won't see much from it, and that's a group that is particularly vulnerable to being brought over to the opposition, because they're the ones who are struggling the most with COVID. At the same time, most people will welcome a public holiday in that sort of long stretch between the June day off and the October day off, whichever one is which. One's Queen's birthday, one's Labour Day. I don't know which is which is also a good pointer towards, I think, the Prime Minister's comments that, this was a symbol of the partnership and Te Ao Māori and our appreciation of it. I think that's a bit of a fudge, really. I don't necessarily think that making a public holiday of something is a way to get better buy-in or acknowledgement or understanding of it, as per Labour Day and Queen's birthday, which I can't quite place on the calendar in terms of the month that they're in. Yeah, look, it's a good move, but at the same time, I think probably the 2 or 3 best political columns I've read in the last week or so have been Janae Tib Shraney and interest.co.nz, Thomas Coughlin and stuff, and Damien Grant in the Sunday Star Times, who are talking about the really big elephant in the room. I think Bernard Hickey's written about it as well, which is that while our politicians are on the campaign trail noodling about public holidays, another pretty good policy that Labor announced today was removing addressing transaction costs for contactless payments, which is a drag on the economy. But they're ignoring the massive transfer of wealth that is happening as a result of essentially money printing by the Reserve Bank, which is inflating asset prices, destroying savings, and right now just seeing, for instance, housing affordability go out the window for anybody who doesn't already own a home, exacerbating all of those problems that we know exist. See hugely inflated bubbles in the stock market, which is something that Bill English actually warned about at the beginning of this crisis, and talked about, there might be some sort of need to address redistribution if the owners of capital, to use some pretty old-fashioned terminology, were not sort of seen to be paying their share of the economic distress of COVID. And that is essentially being ignored by all of the major parties, including Labor, who are, odds on to be the next government again. And, we've heard that, their income tax, their tax policy is forthcoming. Most smart money is on that will be, as we've talked about, a bit of tinkering around maybe creating a new top tax rate, taxing a bit more income. But that doesn't really do anything to address the inequality effects of what's happening right now in the economy.
Capital gains tax would have, but that obviously got kiboshed. But just going back to the Matariki thing, I disagree, Ben. I do think that it's important in terms of the understanding of being a bicultural, multicultural country. There are no holidays that are born out of Māori beliefs or traditions currently. You could argue that Waitangi Day is. I would say it's not. It's a day that recognises the treaty, obviously. I would say that this will resonate with Māori, and it's great that Māori will have something of theirs recognised in the calendar. Symbolism is important. If it wasn't, we wouldn't have flags and all of that sort of stuff. But there needs to be more than symbolism, and I think people will be looking for some more meaningful policy from Labor. For example, a commitment to rid the nation of rheumatic fever or whooping cough, or some sort of resolution to what's happening at Ihu Mātau. So those are the sorts of policies that are important that we measure Labor's performance by.
There was a sort of a small but potentially quite symbolically powerful example in recent days where the Ministry of Health pilot on bowel screening. And there was a lobby. I think Rhys Jones was leading it for the age of eligibility to be adjusted for Māori and Pacifica, given the greater vulnerability and the life expectancy, and that has been kicked out. And it's something like that, small but really important. And we've talked a lot about the health impacts. There was a big report out recently about the disproportionate health impacts. In a way, those things are as important as the holidays, right? Mm-hmm. As far as the economic point you raised, Ben, goes, which is a bit like, it's a bit like, if I have this right, it's a bit like if you fill the economy with the body of the economy with Mountain Dew and Mountain Dew flavoured Doritos, that you need to get it going through the bloodstream, right? Like you need the money pumping through the bloodstream rather than lodging in houses or gold bullion or whatever. And that's the problem. That's what we're not necessarily seeing now, is those injections, those Keynesian stimulus parts of the economic response going into the economy proper.
So there's two parts to the monetary response. The first is keeping interest rates super low, and the idea is that that will encourage businesses to borrow and invest and, you know, grow their resilience as we come out of COVID, and then they'll start spending more money, which flows through society. The second thing is there is just more money being printed, and that's being spent by, you know, and that's available for the banks to lend. It's available for government to spend.
To be fair, we need a lot more cash for people to be buying the tea towels, though. I mean, it's probably partly motivated by that.
That's how you get the economy going again, is you put it into podcast tea towels, and that's how it circulates through, and, you know.
Look, the $8 million from the Shovel Ready Projects Fund that went towards the tea towel set dressing is an investment in New Zealand's future. Spinoff.co.nz/members. The other part of that economic response that we talked about is, of course, the old tax. And we were a couple of days away from Labour releasing its tax policy. And I feel like that's kind of an important... It kind of like signals a switch in the kind of moves into Act 2 of the election somehow, because they clearly understand that this thing has been such an albatross in campaigns gone past that they want to get it out there. They need to front foot it.
They're going to release it like a feral possum where it gets like bludgeoned to death on its way to freedom.
Yeah. And yes, and probably in the next couple of days, and we talked about it a little bit last time round, but I mean, it won't necessarily address that kind of bigger problem that you raised, Ben, in terms of the way that the monetary circulation. But are we going to see is it time for a higher tax rate than 33 cents on the dollar? Annabelle?
I think we've had this conversation before. Yeah, well, I think if we look at Australia, their tax rate is higher, but it kicks in.
But they're promising to bring it down, aren't they?
But it kicks in later.
Kicks in so like 200k or something, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry.
I do think it's time that we have some sort of reform there, but whether or not Labour will have the gonads to push through with it is the real test.
We can't pay back all this money on the magical thinking of growth, right, Ben? I feel like the deja vu. I feel like we had this conversation already.
Maybe if we plant the nation in crystals, we will...
The billion crystals planting project.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to planting crystals. That's what everyone really wants to hear about. That again is a reference to the Green School. We talked about James Shaw apologising. Because he put $11.7 million from the Shovel Ready fund. It was like a $3 billion fund, I think, something like that was kind of produced in the immediate aftermath of COVID. And it was proof, again, that history may not repeat, but it does rhyme, because we had the $11.7 billion fiscal hole last time, and now we've got the $11.7 million Green School.
Crystal hole.
The
crystal planting hole.
The crystal planting, the Green School, private school, and therefore very much antithetical to the ideas and indeed the
vibe,
principles, and moreover the vibe of the Green Party. And James Shaw just sort of did that self-flagellation as we talked about. My thought on that was that you remember one of the great moments in New Zealand audiovisual election campaigning was when David Seymour did that video. He just sort of popped up in a whole lot of random places between rhododendrons and on street corners going, hi.
It's very charming.
Hi. I demand to see James Shaw in a range of areas around New Zealand with Maui dolphins and fields of oats just popping up and saying, sorry. And I feel like that's what people need to see. We're kind of laughing about it, Annabelle, but it was quite a serious cock up on his part, right?
It was, and every time I think of him now, all I can hear is that Tracy Chapman song, the opening strains of that great Tracy
Years
Chapman
gone by and still.
Yeah. I think, it shows a couple of things, doesn't it? One is that sometimes in politics there are people who just appear to be in the wrong party. And I think James Shaw is one of those guys. He should probably be rolling with Vernon Tava or in the National Party in much the same way that someone like Chester Burrows should have probably been with Labour, and arguably someone like Ron Mark as well. Yeah, and it seems that, Shaw is quite a divisive figure within the Greens, and there has been criticism that the Māori wing of the Greens has weakened under his leadership. I do think that, not having a Greens candidate in Te Tai Hauauru, this election kind of adds insult to injury. If you look at kura like te pi'i-pi'inga kaka no mai I rangi te kura kaupapa Māori, te kura kaupapa Māori o Ngāti Ruanui, te kura kaupapa Māori o Tamarongo, all of those kura, I'm sure, could have got great use out of that $12 million, and for it to be given to a private school which completely goes against the vibe of the Greens sends a really poor message to the people of that community, obviously.
I think the Greens membership are being big babies about this. James Shaw had a role as Associate Finance Minister in the Shovel Ready project funding. The way that funding worked was $3 billion was put aside. They made a general call out with, you had about 10 days or 14 days to get applications in, and they did this big sort of open casting call to all of New Zealand and received about 2,000 applications. And the criteria were essentially projects where you could get jobs on the ground immediately. That's where the shovel ready bit comes in, that would create infrastructure that had supposedly these other benefits like modernising the economy, creating a greener future, sustainable productivity. In reality, of course, the only people whose projects were really ready to go and consented and at that stage, apart from the Green School, were councils and NZTA, and they got the vast bulk of the funding. And the issue is that James Shaw was kind of boxed in by what this fund was meant to do. I think it's right that, if your goal was just to get, semi-skilled or construction jobs out the door immediately, you could have just given $1 billion to all the schools to get all their maintenance and repairs done. But they weren't invited to apply for the fund, and that was a different budget.
And so James Shaw got the spreadsheet with all the applications and did an Apple F on
for green,
environment, conservation, climate and green, and landed on that.
I think that's probably right, in the sense that I heard
but that's not to excuse it, right? Like I mean there is obviously the Green Party is more public in its analysis of its own shortcomings than many other parties are. But he has at some point become untethered from the kaupapa of the Green Party in doing that, right? I mean, he's accepted that.
Sure.
He's sorry about it, apparently.
Sorry.
Apparently.
It's so incredibly sorry. At the same time, though, that's for him to, own up to in public and do his self-flagellation tour. But when you have other candidates essentially lambasting the leader as if, and the membership talking about, essentially wanting only the voting tranche of the 6th to 9th percent of their vote in Parliament, that undermines their whole election campaign. The thing that the public hates is disunity. Remember, the average Green voter is not actually somebody who is out protesting at Ihumato. The average Green voter is a late 20s, early 30s, tertiary qualified Pākehā woman living in a reasonably rich suburb. The Green Party doesn't get votes in the Māori electorates. It doesn't get votes in South Auckland.
It used to, actually.
It gets votes in Epsom, Wellington Central, Auckland Central. And so...
In fact, I think in Te Taitonga they're the second highest ranking party for party vote.
Was that when Matariki was running? Or?
Possibly.
Yeah.
The damage to the Green Party, I mean, I think it's probably true that there aren't going to be a huge number of people who defect from support for the Green Party because where are they going? You know, there may be some that would go to the Māori Party. That's true, but on the margins, there may be some who go to Labour. But I think that the problem they have is that it's kind of, they seem to have gone very quiet. And apart from, we should note Marama Davidson's excellent tweet in response to the National Party Working Group meme page. Do you see that? It's very good. It actually, I think, it's in Mad Chapman's column this morning on the spinoff.co.nz.
It was a bit of a bait and switch.
It was just very good.
She did the whole, 1980s movie rapping granny thing. Like, can anybody tell me what WAP means? As if the person who was like reclaiming the C word 2 years ago doesn't know what WAP means.
And you'll have to look that up yourself, listeners. But anyway, it was incredible that in one tweet you could remove all the damage done over so many days by James Shaw. Sorry, you don't need to say sorry for that. Is the very opposite of sorry. Anyway, the only other thing I was going to say about that is that the kind of strange, contorted reality of what happened with that whole episode was that there had been pressure being piled on the Greens for being a bit too soft and for not doing what, say, Winston Peters and Shane Jones and the New Zealand First Party were seen to be doing all the time, which was throwing their weight around, holding cabinet to ransom, blah, blah, blah. And it was almost as though it was the kind of this worst collision possible for James Shaw, because at last he was like going really hard and going, no, I'm going to hold up this whole project, fuck you all, this is really important, look, I'm now doing what everyone told me to do, and then suddenly realising he's picked the absolutely wrong subject to do it with.
I know, he finally got energised, his DNA was activated, and he sprung into action. But that's what I mean, right, is that this is an internal scandal, it's not an external scandal at all. The weird focus, I think, from the mainstream media on the process itself. Of course, the process was a bit of a joke, procedure-wise. They were giving out $3 billion in a matter of weeks. Nobody did due diligence on these projects. The shortlist was 800 projects. They would have...
But really, of 800 projects, is that the best green project there was? It's bizarre. I don't understand why he put a stake in the ground over that particular project.
It may well have been the one that was most shovel-ready. The thing is, I tend to think that this has created an unfortunate situation where people think that funding to non-government projects or non-council projects was the worst of this funding. When in actual fact, I think that, there were project applications put in by business, by iwi, by NGOs, all of which probably would have met, the supposed targets of, a more sustainable economy, modernising the economy, a climate-friendly future.
Hey, tweet us if you know of a project that was better than that one that was ready to roll and missed out and was a good green project. Tweet us. Tweet us up.
Now, speaking of DNA surviving despite the odds, Winston Peters has been not released any policy that I've noticed in the last couple of days. However, he has been visible, both in Dunedin, where he was playing table tennis and having a cheeky dart out the back of the building on campus in a non-smoking zone, which is probably the most impactful thing he's done for some time. And before that, even, there was that interview on Sunday morning with Jack Tame, in which he called Jack Tame James 13 times and refused to engage on a number of questions. I wanted to ask you, Annabelle, because you are, according to my notes, a television current affairs producer.
Occasionally.
And I just want to. I'm genuinely curious. Peters was saying repeatedly, "Look, this is not what the discussion was. Your producer has been not you. You're not the producer on that. You're the producer on the Hui, which is on Sunday mornings on TV3, or as we now call it, the Discovery Channel. There will now be on the Hui, there will now be a range of lions, elephants, and other flora and fauna. Correct?
But he's like a little tiger that eats her manuhiri every weekend.
This is good. You can,
But he's going to now be in a tiger onesie? Is
Yeah,
that the plan?
like on the Flintstones, like a little Betty Rubble kind of situation.
Right, okay.
But Discovery
I'm
also
buying that
has
detail for sure.
those ancient aliens shows and things, right? So you can finally get those Celtic New Zealand guys on.
Oh, yeah.
Talking about the space age civilization
Go
that lived here in New Zealand before
and
Māori.
At last the truth. At last the truth.
Uncovering the real history of New Zealand.
As I was saying, you're a producer on a television program, The Hui, on Discovery Channel on Sunday mornings, and you have discussions with politicians or politicians' minders who are going to be on your television program, and you say this is the broad range, this is the kind of stuff we want to talk about. Is Winston Peters kind of right that he was kind of ambushed, and that there was an attempt to hijack him, and that that Jack Tame put all these questions about the New Zealand First Foundation, the SFO, about whether or not there was any leaking on the Green Party school, and other areas that weren't in the kind of indicated terms of engagement?
Well, different tikanga apply to different interviews depending on the context. So I would say that, if you're standing on the tiles in Parliament or you're trying to get politicians as they cross the bridge, obviously you don't need to send an email in advance with a list of topics. That's part of the tikanga of Parliament and interviewing there. Same with at press conferences, although at press conferences there is an expectation that the questions asked will apply to whatever the kaupapa of the press conference is.
And that you acknowledge that Jacinda Ardern and Ashley Bloomfield are beatified and beyond criticism.
All of that.
Yep.
And then with interviews and when you invite someone onto a show, I believe in the New Zealand context, a different set of tikanga apply, because that person is your manuhiri and essentially you're inviting them into your whare. So what tends to happen is, you ask them on, and of course their minder tries to squeeze absolutely as much information as possible out of you. I mean, they'd get full question lines if they could. Now, of course, no journalist is going to provide a question line to their talent, but it is the tikanga that you provide a list of topics that you wish to cover. And the reason for that is because you want your politicians to be able to answer meaningfully and know what they're talking about, and also because you don't want the mana of your interview to be undermined by them being able to say, I had no idea you were going to ask me this, so I can't answer that question. So I think, given Jack didn't deny that that was the situation, that Winston's criticism is probably justified. If you invite someone on to be interviewed about a taki, you should know what they are so that you can get yourself briefed beforehand and provide the answers that the public wants to know. I actually think that, the interesting thing about that interview is that it was a little bit of a missed opportunity in terms of the New Zealanders who are missing from the livestock ship, because there ended up only being one question about that, and the next day we found out that apparently they've received very little support or information from MFAT, which is an awful, awful situation for those families to be in.
What do you make of it, Ben? I mean, even if you accept all of that,
as a minder,
they're not questions that
I would say that it's
a
different situation here, which is when you're putting a politician up for one of the weekend morning shows, you do want to keep it on topic, and especially if it's related to a policy issue. You would want, you would demand that the topics, be disclosed so that you can prepare for them. And you'd be totally well within your rights to not answer or say, look, I don't have that information if it's a topic that you weren't briefed on.
And the only thing that would change that is if the politician opens the door to those other topics by referencing them in their answers. Then you could go there.
Yeah, on the other hand, if you know that there is an incipient scandal or an issue that you know the public is more interested in and has gotten more media attention than the particular, policy announcement that you released on Wednesday, you do go into those things with your eyes wide open. You accept that if your politician goes on, that you will get at least a couple of questions about, that other issue towards the end, no matter how much you sort of cross your fingers and hope not to.
And it's an election campaign.
It's an election campaign.
Right?
That was the other point that I was making.
Yeah, but the strange thing about it, though, were the questions about whether or not New Zealand First was the leak of the Greens Party scandal, which there were several questions about, and that's kind of a curious one, because for journalists to be trying to out the sources of other journalists kind of seems not in keeping with what we do, given that leaks and sources are the stocks and trades of journalism. Now, if it was a story that wasn't in the public interest, so arguably you could say, Winston Peters and his pension leak might warrant that sort of scrutiny, because obviously it was not in the public interest, arguably, to know what happened with its pension. But this one, you could argue that it's in the public interest that people know what happened with James Shaw supporting that school. So to be going after someone to try and publicly out them as a source,
it was definitely curious.
It's a curious situation.
Sure. But also, if New Zealand First were leaking against their ministerial government
let's just say
colleagues, that'd be
That'd be
important,
normal, wouldn't
I think.
it?
Well, I mean, maybe, but it would still be warrant reporting
during an election campaign.
But it definitely felt like a tangent quite early on. I mean,
my favourite leaks that you can never trace to anyone within government are the ones that say that New Zealand First has gotten a good policy win, and then about 2/3 of the way down the story, there's always a paragraph which says Chief of Staff John Johansson was instrumental in the deal being struck, and then the story just continues, and you're like, I wonder where that came from.
This is all speculation on the part of Ben Thomas, who has no evidence to support his assertions. The other thing, notwithstanding all of that, is that just the kind of classic Winston Peters counter attack, kind of a Muldoonist, and it just is. That was Muldoon's style. The counterpunch was that he TVNZ is a disgrace. No wonder you're doing so badly. All this sort of stuff. It's not that tricky to say, I don't know why you're asking me those questions. I'm not engaging on those points. We had an understanding that I'm here to speak with this hat on or this face mask on, whatever it is.
Well, and
you can, it just sort of seemed.
I agree,
like,
and
it's just like chucking, trying to put out a fire with petrol.
I agree, and the whole thing of like purposely calling him James, it just came across as petulant.
You think purposeful?
I think so.
I think it was an accident at the beginning, and then he
continued. I agree.
Yeah.
I think it comes across
as
petulant.
I think it works for him. I think James is good. I think he should.
He could be James.
But it's still like he's reached that stage of life where a lot of people have more access to their long-term memory than they do their short-term memory. And so when he's being asked about things that have happened recently, like, getting his friends a free trip to Antarctica, whether he was interviewed by the Serious Fraud Office, whether he leaked against his government partners, a little hazy, a little hesitant, sort of stumbled over his words a bit. And then as soon as he's bringing out 70s sort of insults like Philadelphia lawyer, he's in full flight, completely
I didn't even
fluid.
know what that meant. I was like, what's the Philadelphia lawyer?
That's one of his classics, isn't it?
Yeah. It's there with sort of shiny bums and
sunshine.
If you stop telling lies about me, I'll stop telling the truth about you. All of these these rote phrases
to a gunfight.
Yeah, that are just sort of real stimulus response kind of things. And
it's a struggle, isn't it? And look, I mean, the bigger problem is that in this campaign, trying to get a foothold somewhere for New Zealand First, if it's wear a handbrake on the government, then it still remains that the best option for them is that the next poll. By the way, can we have a poll, please? I mean, I know it's expensive, and I love you guys. Thanks so much. But it's been 5 weeks. Something's got to be done. Radio New Zealand, maybe you need to start putting some money into polls. Anyway, what are New Zealand First going to do? You, Ben Thomas, this morning in a column, broke one of the most important cardinal rules of all political punditry, the greatest cliche in New Zealand political campaign and commentary, in that you ruled New Zealand First out, and you never rule New Zealand First out.
Yeah, I think they're gone, and that's because the smart... we used to have this thing called I Predict, which was, I don't know if anyone remembers that. That was where you could basically buy shares that was basically betting on political outcomes. You could bet on the party vote, or bet on who would be appointed to a ministerial position, or bet on a policy announcement. And mostly it was a way for political staffers to insider trade and take money off blog readers. And people in the Kiwi Blogs comments section. But now that that's gone, and you can't pull the wisdom of crowds / the inside knowledge of people willing to compromise their professional ethics to make $200, you've got to look for other signs. And I thought one of the most interesting announcements last week was Stuart Nash, the Fisheries Minister, announcing $60 million for cameras on fishing boats, which is something that New Zealand First had drawn a line in the sand, put their foot down, stalled and stymied for the last 3 years, completely probably unrelated to their close links with the fishing industry.
Totally.
And no sooner had Parliament risen than Stuart Nash was like, we're rolling out cameras on boats. And that seems to be a big send-off for New Zealand First, basically sort of like, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Andrew Little, the Justice Minister, after failing to get agreement on legislation for commercial rent, a process for sort of alleviating commercial rent pressures on tenants with New Zealand First, just went around them and just set up a $40 million fund by himself using the executive powers. And so I think that a lot of the people who are in the best position to know where the polls are heading are acting as if New Zealand First are already gone.
Annabelle, what do you think?
I think I've got to go to work.
Are you going to make do you think New Zealand First are going to survive?
I don't. I don't think they're going to survive, no.
Annabelle's got to go to work, so let's wind it up. Let's say a big thank you to Annabelle Lee Mather, a big thank you to Ben Thomas, and even bigger thank you to Tina Teller, who's over there making all this work. Thank you for your forbearance, as ever, Tina. Thank you, Flick. Thank you, members. Thank you, Tea-Tales. Thank you, the bad boys of Brexit. And thank you to Apologies coming up next, Alice Stenton.
Sorry to everyone. I'm going to wet the tea towel and, whip my back with it.
Ben's going to wet the tea towel. It was all going so well.
Was.
That's not a gross phrase.
Hello, welcome to a very special bonus bit of Gone By Lunchtime featuring the one and only Alice Snedden. Hi, Alice.
Hi, how you doing?
Oh, really well. It's nice to see you.
Thank
the listeners
you.
Can't see you, but I can on a Zoom call. Because where in the world are you today, Alice?
I'm in Auckland, in central Auckland. Can you believe it? Yeah.
Amazing. It sounds very exotic. But you are about to jet off to...
Yeah, I'm off to the UK on Saturday.
Have
London.
you been reading the news lately? Do you...
Yeah, I'm aware that there's a global pandemic, but I'm just choosing with all of my might to pretend that that's not happening and just wear a mask and keep my distance.
I'm sure that jumping from the frying pan into the molten hellscape that is Boris Johnson's Britain.
I know, listen, it's not ideal timing, but it's work and, I don't know.
There are a lot of people angry with you after this bad news series. Jumping the country seems like quite a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. I've got to get out of here.
It's a fantastic series number 2 of Bad News with Alice Snedden. I just watched a couple of days ago the euthanasia episode, which is amazing. And in a way, it made me think that debate hasn't really been traversed enough in this campaign, the strange, elongated, distracted campaign yet. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are so many things about the euthanasia bill that make it a little bit strange in terms of where it sits politically. One is that it's a seemingly liberal issue that's pushed by David Seymour, which I think gives it a strange tinge in terms of it having, I don't know, a swell of support behind it. And then the second thing I reckon is that it's an intersection of law and values, and the values are around kind of death and mortality, and those are discussions in general that I think we tend to avoid oftentimes even when we're actually at the ends of our lives. So I think it's pretty uncomfortable for most people to talk about. But I grew up in an Irish Catholic family, so we were always talking about death as an ever-present reality. But no, I think the country lacks that a lot. They lack the kind of macro legislative debate about how much should the government be involved in people's lives, and then they lack the person-to-person values debate about who does your life belong to, and what does it mean to place value on that.
One of the things that I loved about the episode is that you could see you almost physically being kind of torn by you have that wonderful setup around the kitchen table, but you really were wrestling with this incredibly complex moral question, right?
Well, I think so, and I think it's probably right to wrestle with it. I think anyone who thinks that maybe they have a strong handle on it isn't giving way to the complexity of the issue. Because it is dealing with it's the one decision you can't really take back. You can't reverse it and go, oh, actually I didn't mean it. So there is a lot to tackle, and then it's my own personal worries about mortality and death and what that's actually going to look and feel like. That means that thinking about that last moment is in itself just kind of unnerving. But I will say this, that even though I'm wrestling with it all in the episode, I do feel very resound in my decision to vote in favour of it. I don't think that personal inner turmoil necessarily relates to how I feel the government should be regulating whether or not that's available. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's not the kind of subject that one normally associates with belly-clutching laughs, euthanasia, or death generally. But, I mean, it is funny still, that episode, and all of these subjects that you tackle, many of them, all of them, really serious subjects. It's I mean, obviously you're a funny person, you can't get around that, but there is also a challenge to, presumably, in making these things, to try and work out how you fill it in the funny bits.
Yes. Yeah, well, it's interesting that you said, I don't really think about how to make the show funny. Okay. I think about what would be interesting things to do around that topic, and what's a way to provoke whatever the core of our argument is. But I don't ever go, what's a funny thing to do here? Because I think if I did, that would undermine excuse me, that would it's corona, that would undermine the issue itself. And I kind of just trust that my approach and whoever I'm talking to, that in and of itself will be naturally funny. In the health episode, I just sat down and read out my medical history. And I just read it out for an hour. It wasn't a matter of sitting down and going well, I hope this is crack up. It was maybe this will be interesting. And you kind of just have to trust that hopefully something comes from that. But or even just interesting weird environments to do the interviews in, or how we do them.
It's not one-liners.
No, I don't think it is one-liners, no. But I have a real appreciation for people who can pull that sort of stuff off. But very early on in the first season, I tried to do some stuff that was more character-y or more set-up situation. I really struggled because it requires skills I don't have, like acting. And I can't lie, and I can't ever hide whatever my emotional reaction is to something. So we just learnt we should play to those as strengths rather than weaknesses.
One of the hazards of doing this show is to do it in an election year where everything is kind of changing quite fast. Like, for example, one of the episodes is on prisoner voting. And that must have been a headache, and that the law was changing before you as you made it.
Yeah, it was incredibly tricky from like an editorial standpoint about how to make the episode still be current, because we filmed things on either side of the decision. But personally, obviously, I was happy to see a change, and politically, I was happy to see a change. But I wasn't surprised by the fact that it didn't go all the way that I thought it should. And all of the arguments in the episode, they stayed true. I mean, in a way, I guess it's like cynical to say, but you could always rely on politicians to never quite do 100% of the right thing. So like there's always going to be about 25% where whatever you're arguing is whatever their political capital is they're not willing to expend. So fortunately for the episode, and unfortunately for the greater society as a whole, they didn't put through prisoner voting rights to its full extent.
If they had done, would you just claim that as a victory on your part? Is that?
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure there's a Stuff article I wrote about it in 2016, so I'm sure that was the thing that tipped the scale, no doubt.
It's a fantastic series. Where do people watch it, Alice?
You can watch it on the spin-off, and you can also watch it on RNZ.
But mostly on the spin-off you can watch. I mean,
mostly on the spin-off.
Mostly on the spin-off.
Yes.
Also
depending on who I'm talking to.
Hey, thank you very much. Good luck out there in
Thanks.
Boris Johnson's Britain.
Yes,
bring us back something nice that isn't like a coronavirus or anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will, I hope to.
Lovely
Thanks,
to
Toby.
talk to you. Take care,
too.
bye.
See ya.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
The most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.